Attention all personnel. Incoming podcast. This is MASH Matters.
Hello, this is MASH Matters, the podcast celebrating the greatest television show of all time, hosted by two guys who love the show, but for completely different reasons. I love it because it's my favorite show of all time, and this guy loves it because it was a paycheck. Jeff Maxwell, who played Private Igor on MASH. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Ryan Patrick. Yes, it was a paycheck, and I really did enjoy that paycheck every time I got it. I still enjoy that paycheck because, you know, all us actor types, we do get residuals. So we're very happy when that happens. Yeah, it was good.
And it was a good show. And, it was a good show, not just because of the stellar acting, but also because of the writing. These episodes don't just write themselves. These actors don't just come up with these witty, funny lines all by their lonesome. They have to have quality writers in their corner cranking out fantastic scripts day in and day out. And today we are proud to welcome not one, but two writers here to MASH Matters.
Just to be clear, I wrote everything I said. So let those other guys go ahead.
Here we go. This is a great talk. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Please welcome to the podcast the Emmy Award-winning team of David Pollock and Elias Davis.
Welcome to MASH Matters, gentlemen. David Pollock and Elias Davis. You know, we want everybody to know that all the actors on MASH did not make up their own words. We had really smart guys and girls helping to make all of us sound funny and smart and charming. And those wonderful writers, like the two of you, did that. So thank you for writing all those words that I was able to say. And thank you for being here. So welcome to MASH Matters, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
So first of all, I grew up becoming interested in being funny. I was attracted to humor and funniness. How did you guys, were you young kids and say, oh, gee, I'm going to be a wacky guy and I want to make people laugh? What happened with that?
Well, I may have done some of that, but to my memory, I think I became interested in comedy. And this is a story Elias has heard so many times, so I'll keep it tight. But jump in, Elias, if I leave anything out. Driving around in the back seat. I wasn't driving in the backseat, but I was a passenger in the backseat of my parents' car, often on Sundays, driving around the back roads of Orange County, ultimately, and before that here in LA. And my father always had Jack Benny on at 4:00, Amos and Andy at 4:30, and Bergen and McCarthy, at 5:00. And over time, it just became... I was laughing with those shows. And I guess his, and to a maybe lesser extent, my mom's involvement in that and appreciation of those shows, it took on an importance that maybe it wouldn't have if my parents had been listening to something else. So I think that's how it started. And then TV followed soon after that. I'm talking about the late 40s, actually. And then by 1950, TV was on, and the same people. Jack Benny started in the early 50s. Burns and Allen were another one. I know Elias told me I'll speak for him for all this.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
I remember us talking several times about listening to The Great Gildersleeve, which was a popular radio show. But I think that's where it started, for me anyway.
And so being with your parents and having that, probably sharing that and laughing, was probably an important, something that kind of embedded itself in your head, I would assume, if I'm playing, Dr. Phil for a minute.
Well, it seemed important. I mean, a lot of things seemed important, but this is something that I guess took on more of a, and my father was a writer also.
Oh, okay.
So, that also, I'm sure, factored into it over a lot of years, And of course, this wasn't anything I was measuring or calibrating at the time. It was just a part of my life.
So, Elias, what were you in the car with him? And is that how?
But I was in the car with Dave.
I looked for him, but he wasn't there.
In later years, and his interest in comedy did infect me. So I became more than just the typist of our team. I started to actually contribute humor to it. But like Dave, I do remember listening to a lot of those shows, and they were popular shows in my family, also radio shows, and then to a lesser extent, television. The thing that really sticks with me is that feeling of just being not even in the car, just sitting in the living room, listening to these shows, just like we would later watch them on television.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I've often thought about this. My family, somehow my mother took humor as an important part of our conversation. So sitting at the kitchen table, which is where we had dinner and breakfast, if we ever had that together, there was a high premium put on saying something funny.
Wow.
Something clever,
Okay.
so that the other people around the table would laugh at it. And I, just as a side note, one of my sisters became a very successful television situation comedy writer. So there must have been something infectious about that. And the other thing I remember comedy being important to me because I remember writing term papers and just papers that were required in high school and later in college. And if these were serious papers, but if there was ever an opportunity to put something that I thought was clever and would make somebody laugh into these serious papers, I would write it in. And I remember having the thought, well, Miss So-and-so or Professor So-and-so is really going to really love this. And they never, of course, commented about them at all. No one ever said a word.
I can identify with that too, as far as term papers, because I remember writing a term paper on Robert Benchley and the humorist. And I think then I relied on Benchley for the humor rather than my own.
Yeah.
You just kind of rode along.
He carried me through that paper.
So how did you two find each other?
I wanted to go to law school when I was in college, and then I decided after 3.5 years of college, or about 3.25 years of college, that wasn't for me for various reasons I won't bore you with. And there was a guy named Shelley Keller who was a friend of the family. He was a very well-known comedy writer. And I was with him one day and I said, Shelley, I don't think I want to go to law school. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, these were pretty close to his exact words. Why don't you go into show business? It's a lot of fun and I'll help you get a job. And I said, okay. So that was the end of that. I was engaged at the time. I called my future wife, told her that I wasn't going to go to law school. I was going to go into show business. And she said, okay. And by the way, that was just it. By the way, it was show business. That was the extent of what I decided I wanted to do. But then he did help me get a job as an usher at CBS, and Dave Pollock was there. And he was a really funny guy. I mean, as an usher, he was amazing. I think some of that, drifted away over time, but as an usher, he was hysterical. And I actually did have the thought, which I've probably told Dave and other people a million times, if I can just figure out a way to hang out with this guy, I'm going to, because he's obviously going to be a real success, then I'll be able to share in that. And we started to do stuff together. Even as ushers, we were, writing things that we were.
We even worked things into our tours. We had to conduct.
Well, Dave did.
And we had to conduct tours through Television City.
Oh! I see. This is Television City. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that had been up and running since the early years before we got there, and we would have to give tours from 1 o'clock or noon, or maybe even earlier in the day. Every hour on the hour, there were tours. There were dozens of ushers, so we didn't have to do 12 tours a day. But we had to fill a half hour, and we worked. I remember working jokes into the tour. For example, I would point out the room where they make the commercials louder, and we had other stops along the way.
Well, that's true, isn't it? That's an actual.
That's true, but there isn't a room.
Oh, my tours bought it.
So you were even filling 30 minutes back then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So how did you go from being ushers at Television City to writing for television?
Yeah, well, that's the big question.
Yeah.
Well, first, we had to decide that that's what we wanted to do. I think that came, months and months after we were together working there. I was an usher there for about over a year and a half, I think. I think less so for Elias. I think a big factor was we were assigned to a lot of comedy shows. In addition to TV City, the ushers, not just Elias and I, but all of us, in the evenings, we'd be driving all over the city to Universal to do Jack Benny's film shows, Leslie Lou doing Lucy, I Love Lucy, the Dick Van Dyke Show, Danny Thomas Show. So we were always around those shows.
I have to tell a quick story about being an usher at CBS. I wasn't an usher at CBS for very long. I soon rose to the rank of assistant usher supervisor. And one of my jobs, I had it in me. And one of my jobs was to type up ushers' schedules. And I did that at a typewriter in a little room I shared with the phone guy. And one of the ushers on the staff was a guy named David Geffen. And David Geffen was in my office one day. I'm just showing you what I know about show business. And he was sitting in my office one day, and we were talking. I was typing my schedules, and
you should have teamed up with Geffen. You'd have been retired years ago.
But I'll tell you why I didn't. This is the problem. So he had gotten the job partly because his brother was a well-known attorney in show business named Mitch Geffen. And he said to me when he was sitting there, he said, you know what I'm doing? My brother's giving me a lot of books that are in galleys. And I'm trying to find one that I really like to make into a movie. And I said, what do you mean make into a movie? You're a fucking usher. My knowledge of how to get ahead in show business.
Gosh. Oh, gosh. Well, we can't call them all correctly. Gee whiz. Wow. That's amazing.
Whatever happened to him, I wonder.
Yeah. Whatever happened to him?
But Dave and I did start. I mean, I took a class in comedy writing at UCLA Extension. Ron Carver, I think, was the guy's name. And it was just basically if you could write jokes. And I enjoyed it, and Dave showed the stuff to Dave, who kind of thought it was pretty good. And we just started to think about and figure out how we might be able to do something. And I remember writing a sketch. I think, Dave, maybe it was for the Danny Kaye show that we gave to Sheldon Keller, thinking we'd really impress him.
Yeah.
It was about the refreshment section of a movie theater, where you get your soft drinks and all that. But we were doing it even then, we were trying to do stuff. And as far as how the first breaks and all that, I'll leave that to Dave. He probably can do it more efficiently than I can, tell all the stories.
Well, the first break. Well, I had in college. I had written for a comedy team that was on. Were you guys raised in L.A.?
I was, yes.
Yeah. You remember there was a team, a two-man team on KNX in the very late 50s and early 60s called Condilis and Grant, Paul Condilis and Bob Grant. You remember them?
I certainly I remember Bob Grant. I didn't know that is that the same Bob Grant? He was
years later he became
Bob Grant. Yeah.
He became Bob Grant, a right wing.
Yes.
Yeah, beyond right. But in those days, I never heard a political word out of the guy, but they did a two-man, two wacky guys in the afternoon on KNX, and I just submitted material to them. Ultimately, they liked some things and started using it, and that sort of gave me a confidence, that I could make money doing this. And as far as a first break, we got a job because I had worked at KNX. Well, I'm sort of collapsing the time frame just to speed it along. But
moving forward, yeah.
Elias went to another job to KNXT, which was the CBS affiliate here, and I went to the newsroom at KNX.
I actually went to KHJ, but it was like being at KNXT. It was a local station.
And I was at KNX, and by that time Pat Buttram was doing the afternoons, and I would slip jokes to him sometimes. And Bob Crane was on in the mornings. In around 1965, Bob Crane left KNX to do Hogan's Heroes. He was going to try to keep doing both, but and did for like the first few weeks. And he would come in at like 3 o'clock in the morning and tape, 2 hours of his radio show for,
Wow.
and then go over to Paramount and start doing Hogan's Heroes. That became impossible. So they teamed up two really just staff announcers at CBS, guys named Mel Baldwin and George Walsh. And because I had been working there, I guess over time, the station saw that they could use some writing help. So they came to me and I brought in Elias and they started paying us. And that was really our first job, where every day we had to have some material ready for those guys when they came in the next morning.
Also, if I remember, Dave, that was our first Guild job, wasn't it?
Yes, because they were a CBS station. KNX was in the Guild, so we had to join the Writers Guild.
I mean, we quit the other jobs and we would get together every day and write. I mean, it wasn't like an amazing thing, but we were getting paid. The stuff we were doing was getting performed, and it was a job. I mean, so we sort of started to move forward at that time.
We could see that we could turn it out day after day. Some days better than others, but at least there was always something there we could turn in.
How did you start the process? Was one of you writing and the other one talking, or did you both, throw out jokes or concepts, or how did that work?
Well, sort of all of that. Elias was a faster typer than I was, so he would be typing. And, there on a radio show, it was just little quick throwaway lines. Some bits were longer. We couldn't do big, elaborate production things because they had limited sound effects. But, we never planned out a system. It just sort of materialized as we did it.
Our whole career together, and it's not always this way with all writers. We worked head to head. We were, even if it was head to head, being on the phone talking about, writing a script. A lot of writers write, you take scene one, I'll take scene two. They do it that way, and then they swap them and they rewrite each other's stuff. I'm not saying that never happened. It probably happened at some point for us. Maybe we did that on a rewrite or something. But basically, when we finally got going, we had two desks in an office and sat across from each other. It's really annoying to sit there every day staring at
Right.
Just like we're doing here, sitting here looking at each other.
That's it.
I'm a little annoyed now, but I don't know whether that's meaningful.
I think most writers do work that way, sort of head to head. Not dramatic writers so much. There aren't as many two-person teams in dramatic writing. There were some big ones, but for the most part, I think dramatic shows are one person's concept, and in comedy, you spark off of each other, so it sort of lends itself to comedy.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, teams, and I've known some writing teams, and the fact is, it's kind of like a marriage. I mean, you have to have a relationship, and it has to work, and you have to be respectful of each other's ability, and you have to be sort of forceful about what your ability is as well, and sort of blend it all and make all that work.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And at the same time, just be funny. Golly,
yeah.
You got to do that too.
Yeah.
So let me get this out of the way, and then we can just jump into MASH, because maybe some of our MASH listeners don't care about this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh, we have listeners here? It's not just the four of us?
Dozens and dozens of listeners.
Yeah.
Oh, if they're still with us at this point.
Yeah. So a million years ago, maybe I'll cut to the chase. I know you guys went on and you became producers of the Steve Allen Show. Certainly a favorite guy of mine growing up. I thought he was the funniest guy in the world, and he was wonderful. As I grew up, I started my showbiz performing career as a comedy team. And my buddy in high school and I got together and we had a good time, and we started performing at parties and high school events and all that kind of stuff. And we began to develop little personalities and little concepts about how to be funny and various themes and stuff. So we did it, and we got better and better and better at it. Pretty soon we found ourselves actually making money like you guys. We were hired by various people and clubs, local clubs, and we do 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there. And we were having a great time. This was like, this is big time. We were having fun, meeting a lot of chicks too, which was good. So at some point, and I don't remember, I think it was an agent called us and said, "Hey guys, we got you a really cool thing here. You get to audition for the Steve Allen Show." wow. Now, both of us were out of our minds because we loved Steve Allen, thought he was a genius. And we went, oh my God, the Steve Allen show. This is big. So we showed up at wherever it was, somewhere in Los Angeles, to audition for the Steve Allen show.
Elias, are these the two guys we turned down?
These are the guys you said couldn't cut it. These are the ones. Yeah.
So we auditioned for two guys named Pollock and Davis. And we were nervous. This was a pretty cool thing to audition for a TV show. We walked in and we did our first bit, and you laughed and you said, well, can you do another one? So we did another one, and we said, well, can you do another one? Yeah, sure. And so we did virtually every piece of material we had. We were exhausted. I think it was like 25 minutes later, or half an hour later, whatever it was, we were pooped. And you guys said, hey, well, you're pretty funny. Yeah, that's really great. Well, thank you very much for coming in, or something like that. And we left and thought, well, that went pretty well. They liked us, they laughed, and gee, this is great. So we went on our way, waiting to be called to get on the Steve Allen show. But we never got the call.
And all the time, all the years we were on MASH, you never came up to it. You had us right there.
Yeah, I tried to convince Dave that we should bring you back.
You know what? We didn't get the job, but the journey was wonderful anyway, and the audition was really, special to us.
We want to apologize. But I will say, and I'm not going to name names, and this is not a joke, this is really true. There were people that we didn't hire who became huge stars, big comedy stars that we thought, I don't think so. So we just weren't that good at that part.
Well, we had a bit. Our big bit was an interview with the world's first pregnant man. So maybe that was just a little bit too dicey for. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Pregnant man. These were the guys. These were the guys. Well, there were, but just to defend ourselves, we did hire Robert Klein, came in and did a monologue for us. And I'm trying to think of somebody else.
Who was the guy we were just talking about who did the dog routine?
Oh yeah, Steve Martin.
Steve Martin.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
He said, yeah.
In fact, in his autobiography, he mentioned his first time on TV, which I don't know if we had any idea about that, but he came in and pitched an idea he wanted to do. Somebody obviously recommended him and sent him to us. I can't remember how it came about, but suddenly we're in a room with it, and he said that the bit I want to do is just come out to a stand-up mic, and do a monologue to dogs. And he wanted about a half a dozen dogs placed in a semicircle facing him, their backs to the audience. And he just did a series of just dumb jokes, fire hydrant jokes and obvious jokes that supposedly a dog would like. And he did this. The dogs, of course, just sat there and looked at him. And it was really funny. And it ended with the dogs left except for one, which walked up to him and lifted his leg and peed on his leg. It worked perfect.
Yeah.
Jeff, I would like to just ask, just as a favor, that when you do write the autobiography, that you do leave that out.
I was going to open with that, actually, because I thought it creates sympathy.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, the title of the autobiography is Pollock and Davis Turn Me Down.
Yeah. Turn me down for a dog act. I don't know. They could have had a pregnant man, but no, they wanted a dog.
Who was the ventriloquist with Jerry Mahoney?
Paul Winchell. Yeah.
Paul Winchell. Remember, he came in, Elias, and we knew he was a big star. I used to watch him when I was a kid. He had, this in later years, he had perfected new routines with different, I can't remember what all he pitched, but he did different voices and stuff, but it just didn't seem, Steve Allen-ish, or I don't know why, but
yeah.
I'm sure we made a lot of mistakes.
We made a lot of mistakes,
yeah. Well, thanks anyway. Thank you anyway for the audition.
Funny story about the whole MASH thing. because I know you want us to talk about MASH, and this is a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
MASH.
We were working writers, and we got hired somehow through our agents or whatever to write a MASH. And we came in and we met with Larry Gelbart, and we wrote an episode called The Tub. And we got paid for it because that's what we did. And we got paid, and it never was aired. I mean, we never got shot, and we never heard from Larry that, why. Obviously, the reason was it wasn't good enough. And then years later,
and we felt worse
Yeah.
about that than I'm sure you guys did.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
That we could even continue our careers
Yeah.
after being shot down by Larry Gelbart.
Yeah, it's serious. So later, we did get hired. We knew Thad Mumford, and we did get hired to write an episode, and that started us going. And then we mentioned to Bert, how does this happen that two guys who wrote a script? Because by the way, they gave us the Tub, and they said, "Can you make this work? Because if you can, it's good for us. It's good for you." And we said, "No, there's no way we can make this work." But he said, and this is a serious note. It makes us feel good. He said that, guys, I hired you. One reason I hired you is because Larry liked you enough to have you in to talk to you about writing a script. That was a real, that was really important. And it sort of says something, the history of MASH before us. It says something about why it was the show it was.
Yeah.
Larry Gelbart was a brilliant guy.
Yeah, he sure was. I mean, he set the tone for everything, from the time it started. He really did.
Yeah.
And the quality, he set the bar real high.
No kidding.
I mean, real high.
Absolutely.
So now you've written the script, and so now, how do you become part of it? Is it, you eventually make a deal and say, "Hey, we're going to do 23 episodes"? Or?
No, the Tub was years before. It was several years. We had gone on
Right
to other shows. Mary Tyler Moore and other sitcoms and variety shows.
But Thad asked us, we knew Thad, and he asked us if we wanted to.
Yeah, we had worked with Thad Mumford on That's My Mom.
Yep.
And he had preceded us onto the staff of MASH some years later, around 1980, I think it was, 79 or 80.
Yeah, because you were on season 9, 10, and 11, right?
That sounds right, yeah.
We were only on staff for one of those years.
Okay.
Which was 10. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, I think Thad.
We were freelancing during season 9, and though we wrote a lot of scripts, and we were on staff for season 10, and then we were at Warner Brothers, but we were getting MASH episodes in season 11.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I think that if you count the final MASH movie, we wrote 19 episodes.
So was it a real thrill at that point to suddenly become part of MASH and the MASH family?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because you always knew it would turn out well.
Yeah, it was great.
Were you fans of the show going into MASH?
I can remember watching it. Yeah, I love Larry's jokes. I get, the best jokes ever. I don't know that I watched every single episode.
What was different about writing for MASH than it was to write for Mary Tyler Moore and All in the Family and these other shows that you were a part of?
Well, when you got right down to the mechanics of it, there was nothing that much different. I mean, Mary Tyler Moore was a top show, and we loved writing for those characters. We thought we knew them, and we liked writing for Jim Brooks and Alan Burns. If it's a good successful show, it's usually always fun because the characters are good and you understand them, and when they're well defined, it just makes it easy. I always felt bad that we weren't around MASH at the time to be able to write for Frank Burns, because he was such a great character.
There was a real sense of, I don't want to overstate this, but there was a sort of a family feel about the whole operation that you don't often get on shows. There are people who get along, and there are people who are friends. I think on MASH, the cast was always respectful towards the writers. It was, they weren't throwing around and saying, what is this? Even if they didn't like it, they didn't, just basically made a statement that I think this could be better, or we could fix this. And the writing staff was terrific. Bert was an amazing guy. We never disliked the job. We never disliked anybody involved with the show. And that did make it special. And it was just huge. I mean, you probably have heard this story from a lot of people you talk to. When the final MASH aired and we all went to an early screening, that night, but before it actually, we got to see it in a screening room, and but the streets were empty, is my point, when we were driving there.
Yeah.
And the other thing that made it special was that it really raised our, what would you say, Dave, sort of like our stature, and not ours, just, everybody who worked on it. It was a big deal. Warner Brothers, I don't know if your audience is interested in this kind of thing, but Warner Brothers hired us to work on a development deal during the last season of MASH. We were a lot of MASH, and they were happy to do that. They were happy to do that because they could say to prospective producers and people with networks, we got guys here who are working on MASH.
Oh, yeah.
You talk about these characters and how they're already, fully formed. What is the pressure coming into a show where these characters are fully formed and now you have to be the ones putting the words into these established, beloved characters' mouths?
That's the job of a writer in television. When Dave and I would get a job writing a show, we would make sure we watched them. I mean, we may never have watched the show before, but we would sit down and start watching them and reading them, because our job was to echo waiters' voices. And so we had to make those voices part of us. And a lot of people don't do that. They think, I'm going to write this funnier.
Yeah.
Because I'm a funny person. I'm going to write this funnier than it's been written before. That's not the job.
Suddenly you realize that you hear the voice in your ear. You don't know when that moment comes, but initially you have to sort of feel your way and try to pick up the voice, hear it clearly.
Were there characters on MASH that were easier to write for, or were there characters that were more challenging for you to write for?
Private Igor Straminsky, was that really a tough? Really tough. I can see you guys sitting around. What am I?
Let's talk about him.
Okay.
Yeah. These guys did some research. They were ready for it. But Steve Allen's story and everything.
Yeah.
I've been ready for that for 32 years. Come on.
Yeah. You've got it. Yeah, you had it down to a nice 45 seconds.
Yeah.
I guess still, just speaking for me and maybe Elias, the character of BJ was hard. Well, I think was the hardest because in a way he was sort of a lower volume Hawkeye. And in other ways he wasn't. But I guess I saw him as maybe the least defined of the characters.
I would imagine that would have been very difficult for him as an actor to come in there and say, try and figure out, how am I going to find this guy?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's replacing, Wade Rogers and trying to figure out what to do. And
yeah,
boy, that was a tough one for him.
Yeah.
But he succeeded. He did find ways, you all did. Yeah.
That's a great question. I don't ever remember Dave and I, where there was any sense that we were stuck, or another thing I don't remember, and that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I don't remember turning a script in and having Bert or anybody else say, "Oh, you guys, geez, what do you think you're doing here with this, with one of our characters that it doesn't work." The hard part's when you write and the fun part actually is when you're writing a script and you get to bring new characters in, because a lot of the shows have characters who only are just one-time characters on the show, and then you get to sort of have fun to try to figure out how to what to do with that character and how to make that character interesting and maybe funny. So that was something that could slow you down because you're trying to find that voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's also a challenging and kind of good thing to do.
Did you ever have an episode that you did that you'd like back?
You mean because we screwed it up so badly?
Well, I didn't say. I just said, would you like back? I mean,
just take another crack at it.
We all have our favorite episodes,
Yeah. Well, that's the second part of that question. And let's start there. Do you have a favorite episode, the two of you?
I think a few.
Okay.
But usually, I tell me, Dave, I don't know if Dave agrees with this. You do remember some jokes. There's no question about that, because that's one of the things you're doing.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I wonder if you've heard this from a lot of the writers on MASH. what really counts when you're writing situation comedy, and the thing that gets every writer's brain going and working hard, are the stories. The stories are the toughest. That's where you spend a lot of your time. I don't think there's a writer who doesn't say, wow, this is a great story. I wonder how we're going to write it. You can say the story, I'm not quite sure how this story goes, and therefore, or what it's about or what's underneath. So I think Dave and I probably remember, or I shouldn't speak for Dave. Dave has a much better memory than I do, but I sort of feel like what I remember mostly are stories.
Stories are the hardest because there's always traps in them. We worked with Carl Reiter on a series, and sometimes we'd start at 9 o'clock in the morning and have a great idea, and we'd be going at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And then suddenly at 3:15 in the afternoon, he would say, this story goes off in a scrawl. There's a trap in it. It doesn't work. We can't do that because of X, Y, and Z in the first act. It's hard to see initially. It's hard to see where the holes are going to be of the story sometimes until you get into it.
I always quote to people who are interested in writing, I always tell them about one that Dave and I did called Blood Brothers. And the reason is because, and it's not funny, but that was a serious story, but it to us was just kind of to use ironic, not meaning funny, but where there's a hidden kind of strange connection. And I don't know if you guys know the Blood Brothers story, but if I remember correctly,
let's hope Jeff does. He was in it.
Were you in it, Jeff?
I hope so. I don't know. I'll ask Ryan. Was I in it? I don't remember.
Well, I don't know that as a fact. I assume you were in all of them because every show was in the best tent.
Yeah, that's right.
At some point.
Well, that's a good point.
But maybe you weren't.
Or you might not have been in the scenes. The story simply was about a soldier comes in wounded, and he comes in with his buddy. And he goes into the OR, the wounded soldier, and the doctors come out and tell his buddy that he's going to have transfusion because he's losing a lot of blood. And the buddy says, well, if he's going to have a transfusion, I'd like to be I'd like you to use. We're really close, and I'd feel really good if it could help him if I could donate the blood. And they say, sure, we'll test your blood. And they do test his blood, and he has leukemia, which is what they discover when they test his blood. And so the other guy is fine. He goes, they use some other blood and he's fine and they save his life, but his buddy realizes that he doesn't have long to live. And that just seemed like in terms of what a story is, that was pretty good kind of twist in the story. And I think we got some.
And certainly one for big laughs down the road too.
No, not big laughs. But we wrote another part in there though that had some.
Oh, good. All right.
Yeah. That didn't stop us from a whole other story that had laughs.
I know that there was so much research done by Gene Reynolds and Larry Gelbart initially. So many doctors and interviews that they interviewed doctors in Korea and back when they were back here too.
Yeah, we would read those things.
Yeah, would you? Was that information helpful and very important to you? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Particularly if we were assigned an episode that came off of that, we would work out the story, then they'd hand us the whole packet, Sometimes they'd go on 9, 10, 11 pages.
Yeah.
One of our guests here on the podcast several episodes back was Marina Bryant, the real life USO performer who shared her story with Burt Metcalf that was then turned into That's Showbiz, the episode that you wrote, That's Showbiz, about the USO.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Part 1 and 2.
She tells the story of coming out and sitting in the writing room and talking about her stories and sharing these, her experiences and how you were able to take those real life stories and craft them into what was, eventually a 2-parter. And I have to think that has to be a rare occurrence when you're actually sitting and talking with somebody as opposed to just pouring through pages of research, right?
Yeah.
Who was the woman whose story it was?
Her name is Marina Bryant. And in the script, she's Marina Ryan.
Oh, And that was the Gwen Verdon role, I assume.
No, because Gwen Verdon's role was actually Gypsy Rose Lee.
Ah,
Marina was the young lady who had the appendicitis and then had the romantic involvement with Hawkeye, which Marina, when we talked to her, she wanted everybody to know that she didn't actually fall in love with her doctor.
You know, that was I mentioned this earlier. I think that, I don't know if other people have talked about this. One of the things that made MASH better than a lot of shows for us, and I wonder if other writers have said this, was the very thing we just talked about earlier. There were the two stories. Mm-hmm. There was a serious story and a comedy story, and you don't get to do that very often. That's not something that's common in writing, or wasn't then, that's for sure, in writing television. And that gave us all, I think, a feeling of the important, I don't want to overstate it, but that the show had a certain kind of importance, because there were these, in addition to just making people laugh, we were trying to say something about war, and we were trying to say something about, you know, friendship and
one of my personal favorite moments in any of the episodes that you were a part of is a serious moment, and it's in Sons and Bowlers. Mm-hmm. That moment with Charles and Hawkeye, as Hawkeye is waiting to talk to his dad to find out if his dad is okay.
Yeah. My father's a good man. He always wanted the best for me. But where I have a father, you have a dad.
Charles, you never told me anything like this before.
Actually, Hawkeye, I've never told you anything before.
the thing I liked about that episode was getting to work with Hy Averback, because as a kid in the back seat of that car, I would hear Hy Averback on the Bob Hope Show every week.
Yeah. He was great, wasn't he? He was a terrific guy.
Such a nice guy.
Yeah. When you left MASH, you certainly went on, you wrote a lot of other things after MASH, Frasier and all these great shows. Was it tough to switch gears and kind of go into the heads of those kinds of characters? Or was it just sort of what you had to do, your job?
Yeah, it's just a different, wherever you go next, it's new characters. Mm-hmm. So you're always shifting gears. I never saw it in automotive terms.
Yeah. When you think back, to the days long ago, way before our time, Dave knows more about this than I do because of his family history, but most shows were, or maybe all shows that weren't like variety shows and stuff like that, were written by freelancers. So the whole writing community, especially in situation comedy, was made up of people who would go from show, they write a couple of this one, then they'd write a couple of that one. There were people who wrote a lot of individual shows, but there were people who moved around. And it's kind of, I think, what you have to learn in order to be a writer in television is that very thing. You have to learn, you can go from thinking only in terms of these characters to now forgetting about them. Because you don't want to say, oh, well, this is a little bit like that character from MASH. Maybe we can put that into this character's mouth. That's not a good idea.
Yeah.
Gosh, MASH was became such a big deal. I mean, it became this iconic television show, much like Lucy and all those kinds of shows. Is that meaningful to you guys? I mean, do you walk away going, wow, I was part of that?
Yeah, it's great to have been able to be part of it. I was in a conversation where I threw in a Zoom thing because I turned 80 a few days ago, and I threw in
happy birthday.
80. Wow.
Dave's amazing.
I did not know that.
I threw in this thing about some of the things that Dave and I had worked on, and as you mentioned, there were some important ones in there, And when I had finished, somebody said, as we were all saying goodbye, they said to me, and Elias, thank you so much for writing for MASH. That's a show that made a real difference in my life. You don't hear that, and people mean it.
Yes,
they do.
Yeah,
they do.
It's pretty special.
It is. It's something I've learned doing this. I'll say this again ad nauseum. I've said it, but Ryan is a big fan of MASH, has been for a long time. I used to work there. He loves the show for his reasons. I love the show for my reasons.
Right.
For me, when we do this podcast and we started it, and I started to hear the genuineness of all of the people's feelings about MASH and what it meant to them growing up and what it did with their families. And it created careers. Women became nurses, men became doctors, guys became food servers. It was across the board. But it's important to them, really important.
Yeah,
I'm blown away by it. And they say things to me about various things that I've done on the show, and it's really an emotional thing to hear the great response and the great emotional impact MASH had on everybody. So
yeah,
you guys did good.
No, I agree, and I totally agree. And I will say, because this is something we didn't talk about, but I guess I just alluded to it when I talked about what that woman said. Of all the shows we've written, and we've won, we've gotten some nominations and things like that. I won't get into that, but it is the one that stands out in people's minds as a benchmark program in terms of history of television. And and I will say this too. I wonder if this is true. I think we were just lucky. There's a lot of really good writers in television who could have gotten the job instead of us and would have done a really good job. And we were amazingly lucky. I think we did a good job once we got it. So I don't think we didn't deserve that, but it does make me feel fortunate.
And it all goes back to having given Thad Mumford a job years before.
That's right. That's exactly right. Had lunch with him when he offered us the job to write a script. We were having lunch with him one day.
Yeah.
Good thing you went to lunch that day, huh?
That's right. We could have said, "Hey, Thad, we're busy."
Right.
Yeah.
You alluded earlier to something. We're talking about the finale, the process of writing the finale, which I have to imagine was different than writing other episodes of MASH. What was that process like? And just generally the hoopla surrounding the craziness of the finale. What are your memories of that?
Well, trying to contribute to the hoopla. And Ryan, have you investigated how that was written? The mechanics of writing that?
My understanding is that the entire script was split into segments and handed off to different writers and writing teams who also then collaborated with Alan.
That's right.
Exactly right. Yeah. Half hour segments.
Okay.
Yeah, that was different. Prior to that, there were meetings with Alan working on the story. A couple I remember in a restaurant just down the street there on Pico. Can you remember that place?
Italian place, but I don't remember.
Well, I guess the main memory I have from that particular lunch, and I can't remember how defined the story was at that point. My memory is that it was pretty early in the process. And because we were still at 20th Century Fox, when it came down to writing that half-hour segment, and we did the first half hour, wrote it with Alan. We were already at Warner Brothers, and Alan came to our office there, and we did it. But back to just hammering out the story, I remember there was the guts of the story is that it's a pretty serious, grim situation. We were going on and on about it, and there were like, I forget who all was around the table, but there were like two elements to the conversation, about how serious the serious quotient was tilting the thing way heavier than the comedy. And a lot of us were being aware of the fact that this is the last episode. We wanted to be as funny as people remembered MASH. And Alan, I just remember the quote from Alan was, "Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, the last thing I want is when the show ends, everyone's heads in the toilet." He said. So that was sort of an overriding kind of preoccupation that always hovered above hammering out that story.
Yeah, it was that serious story, about Alan and psychiatrists and all that. And but I do want to point out, just because he deserves it, he's just the nicest guy.
Yeah.
And what a thing to do, to be able to sit there for 5 days. I think we took a week, maybe Dave might remember that better.
Yeah.
To sit in our office at Warner Brothers for 5 days with Alan Alda and work on it. It was really memorable, and it was really wonderful. And I think he's a terrific person.
And we never had to put a word on a piece of paper because he did it all with a little handheld tape recorder.
Yeah.
So we'd talk, and then we'd arrive at something, he'd talk it into the tape machine.
We hear that a lot from everybody about what a wonderful person Alan Alda is. And over the years, so many people have said to me, well, what's Alan Alda really like? I'm sure he was a terrible person. He did those terrible things. He's a big star. I'm sure he did crazy things. No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
No,
he
he
was
didn't.
a wonderful, wonderful human being, and they're almost sad to hear that,
Yeah, they got no story.
I got no story. I got to say, he's a nice guy. What am I going to do?
I got the insides too.
Yeah.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah. He was inspirational, motivational, funny, charming, supportive. He's just a terrific human being.
He drove me home one day when I was going to pick up my car and it wasn't ready. And he was, this is from Warner Brothers again. And he just drove me over the hill.
Yeah, just like a real person.
Mary Tyler Moore never did. Steve Allen never did.
No, never.
No.
But Bert, with whom we were lucky enough to work for those 3 years, we worked for a lot of showrunners, and we did some of that ourselves. And he was just as decent. That's, when you talk about and I mentioned respect before, but there was just that kind of decency that, and you see it now in where you look online and the, Mike keeping everybody in touch. Where does that happen on a TV show?
Right. Right. Yeah, really, that's a great word, decency. That's what the whole thing, that is really the theme behind that, all that.
Yeah.
Well, you should, Jeff, you should be telling us how nice a guy Al. I mean, you saw him you were working with him every day on the set.
Long time. Well, he was an inspiration to me, and he was, I didn't know him when I first got there. I could have cared less. I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
And so he was just a guy named Alan Alda. And then as time progressed, I realized that he wasn't just a guy named Alan Alda. This was a talent powerhouse that I should really pay attention to and try and learn as much as I could from.
I can tell you, Jeff, that you mentioned earlier you love Steve Allen.
Yeah.
And I can link those two together. Elias and I were at Steve Allen's memorial service. Man, there was a lot of people there, including Alan Alda. And during a break or afterwards or somewhere, I guess it was afterwards, I bumped into Alan, and he was telling me that when he was, this had to be in the late 1940s. So he said it was when he was, I think, 14 years old. Steve Allen was on KNX here. It's when he really started doing the Tonight Show. Really came out of a local show he did on KNX, where he came on at midnight and just interviewed people in the audience. He was supposed to be playing records. It was supposed to be a disc jockey show, but employees in the station would come around and listen to him, and they would laugh. The audience at home heard laughter and thought there was a studio audience. In fact, KNX didn't want to open up an audience. Steve told the story. The management of the station said, well, then we got to hire janitors. We got to open restrooms at 12 o'clock at night. And that's going to cost us a lot of money. But anyway, Alan had earphones welded onto his radio in his room. I mean, now everybody walks around with earphones, but back then, nobody listened on earphones. So he could listen to Alan could listen to Steve Allen at midnight without his parents knowing.
Nice.
That's great. Nice. Yeah, boy. Well, yeah, Steve Allen was great. He was a wonderful performer. Great. Loved that show. Too bad I wasn't on it. It's okay. It's okay. All right, guys.
Gentlemen, we thank you for your time. As we bring this to a close, I have just one last question. The name of our show is MASH Matters, and we named it that because, we discuss all matters associated with MASH, but we also talk about why MASH does matter. And here we are. We're coming up. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the pilot episode.
Wow.
And all these years later, it's still making an impact in the lives of people who are discovering it really for the first time and reliving it too. Why do you think all these years later, MASH still matters?
Well, that's a great question.
Well, I would say, when those residual checks still keep coming in.
My answer is exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, I know you want to wrap it up. It occurs to me that Elias and I were doing a show in London in 1971, and Larry Gelbart was living there at the time, and he was working on the pilot. We were at a party at I think Mort Lockman's house, and he was saying they're doing a half-hour pilot for the movie, which we had all seen by that time. And I remember thinking, wow, Larry's going to do a sitcom pilot on MASH,
Wow.
It was like a throwaway thing, and so we were there for the pilot and to the final episode.
Wow.
No, but I know it's a serious question. I guess because it covered, it was entertaining and what it had to say. And this didn't come up in our hour here, but the irony of it being about Korea from 1950 to 53, but in a way about the Vietnam War, which it dovetailed through, those Vietnam years of the 70s. And am I right? Vietnam started in maybe the late 60s, I guess.
Yeah.
And as the Vietnam War, the longer it went, the more people hated it. And what MASH was saying about Korea, they were also kind of saying about Vietnam.
That's exactly right. It was an
I think that's what hit the nerve.
It was an anti-war show at the time that the United States was at war, but it was done with heart, and it wasn't anti-war about the killings on the battle. It was about injuries on the battlefield to a certain extent, but it didn't go out and show the devastation of war. It just talked about what was happening in people's lives, I think. And I think the other thing is was the Sons and Bowlers story. I think when people say it, that idea of two men who were regular characters that people got to know and like, and who were talking about their fathers. And, and then one was a dad and one was father. And that touches those kinds of things, which when you could do that on MASH, they would love it. When you could do that, you would entertain people and touch their lives in a very real way at the same time and make them think about their own lives. I think that was lucky that could be, a part of what we got to do and to try to make people laugh.
Well said, guys. Wow.
And it gave you, Jeff, a chance to get back at it.
Thank God for MASH.
Embarrass us in front of all of your whole network here.
Yeah, humiliation with that work for you, if I say that.
I think it was Elias who was the most negative.
Was he?
I think I saw the positive aspect of the
Yeah.
We're on record as
Thank
both
you.
blaming
Thank
the
you.
other guys.
Yeah.
That's the kind of team we are.
What a treat to talk to Pollock and Davis. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving of your time and sharing some wonderful stories with us here on MASH Matters. I really enjoyed that, Jeff.
I really did too. What a couple of cool guys, and what a couple of talented writers.
And I'm so glad that you were able to get your story off your chest about auditioning for the Steve Allen Show. I know that's plagued you for many, many years. So I'm glad that you finally had some closure.
I love those guys, but I'm still a little bitter. Thanks, Pollock and Davis. Thanks a lot. But, it was fun because we realized a little bit later after the interview that we have a mutual friend that neither of us knew we had. So that's been kind of a revelation. And I've actually been in touch with that mutual friend after many, many years. So it was really fun.
And when you say a mutual friend, we're not just talking about like in the business. It was a mutual childhood friend, right?
Well, I was a child. Yeah, he was more of a friend of my brother's, actually, and I knew him. But they were very good friends in high school. And he went on to become a kind of a famous guy. But it was great to find out that, who would have thought that we would have connected this guy between us. So it was really fun. Great interview. Great guys. Thanks, guys, for being here. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. You can reach out to us, mashmatterspodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Email us questions at mashmatterspodcast@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail, 513-436-4077. All right. Another great episode in the books. 2 wonderful guests, and who knows, we might have some more surprises for you on the horizon.
Many, many, many surprises coming up. Many. So keep your pants on. Well, wait a minute. I said that wrong. Go ahead.
Until next time, here's looking up your old address. Why did my voice squeak?
I don't know. I don't know why I said keep your pants on. My brain wasn't working either.
Oh, that's a wrap.